It was supposed to be a normal Saturday. Tyrone Jenkins had just stepped inside for 2 minutes too, just long enough to grab his phone charger from the bedroom outside. His 6-year-old daughter, Amani, was playing hopscotch on the sidewalk, her braids bouncing, her laugh echoing like music across the block. Her brother, Malik, 10 years old, sat on the porch steps with a juice box, watching her with half an eye, bored but present. When Tyrone came back out, the sidewalk was empty. At first, he thought maybe she'd gone to the neighbor's yard, maybe to pick the little purple flowers she liked. He called out, "Imani," and waited, smiling. But there was no answer. 10 minutes later, he was running door to door by the time the police arrived. 30 minutes had passed. The neighbors formed a search line. People shouted her name into bushes. Storm drains parked cars. Tyrone's voice cracked from calling too loud. Malik was crying now. Panicked, clinging to his dad's leg. "I told her not to go nowhere. I told her that night." Tyrone sat on the curb, with his face in his hands. He hadn't cried like that since his wife passed away. 2 years before, the Mani had been his light, his only girl. And just like that, she was gone. The police found nothing. No witnesses, no tire tracks, no sounds of screaming. The street camera across the road had been broken for months. They filed a report, opened a case, interviewed the neighbors. Everyone cooperated except one, a man named Lester Mullins. Quiet white, middle-aged, lived 2 doors down, said he'd been inside all day. Nobody saw him search. Nobody saw him speak. But he had a dog, a huge growling Rottweiler, that barked every time a child passed the gate. The cops took notes, promised to keep digging, but by the end of the week, they were already moving on. And just like that, Imani Jenkins became another missing black girl, whose name never made the headlines. Tyrone didn't eat for days. He walked the neighborhood every morning with Imani's pink jacket in his hand, hoping she'd see it and run to him. Miss D, his mother, came over to cook and pray. Aunt Keisha started printing flyers, hanging them at bus stops and laundromats. Malik stopped talking altogether. His once playful eyes turned dull, distant. He blamed himself. Tyrone couldn't even find the words to comfort him. Days turned to weeks, weeks to months. They held a vigil, candles, photos, a prayer circle, a cardboard sign that read, "Please bring her home." But as the years passed, people stopped showing up, except Tyrone every year, on the same day. He stood on the same sidewalk and stared at the spot where his daughter disappeared. Sometimes he screamed. Sometimes he whispered her name. Always. He waited. He never sold a house, never changed her bedroom. Imani's stuffed bear still sat on her pillow, arms outstretched like it had been waiting for a hug for 10 long years. Malik grew up angry. He dropped out of school. Kind of fights ended up in juvie at 15. His file said conduct disorder, but Tyrone knew better. Malik was shattered, grieving a ghost. Then came a day. Everything changed. It was Malik, now 20, who noticed it first. He'd been walking past the old Mullins property. The house had gone up for auction after Lester died of stroke. The dog kennel in the backyard, once covered with tarp and vines, had been torn down. A construction crew was leveling the yard for new owners, but something was wrong. The earth under the kennel was freshly dug, concrete poured too. Recently, Malik felt something crawl up his spine. He broke down the fence that night with a crowbar beneath the concrete slab. Under the packed soil was a metal hatch, and behind that hatch, a stairwell. The smell hit him first: damp, mold, bleach, and something else: decay. He called Tyrone, called the police, called everyone. What they found down there would haunt them forever. A room, bare mattress, steel chain bolted to the wall, a small sink, a cracked plastic mirror, and in the corner, curled in a ball under a torn blanket, was a girl, thin pale, her braids now tangled and matted, her wrist, scarred eyes wide and terrified. When the flashlight landed on her face, she screamed, then whispered, "Please, don't take me back." It was Amani, 10 years later. But not the same girl. Tyrone dropped to his knees. "Baby, it's Daddy. It's me. You're safe now." She didn't recognize him at first. Her body flinched when he moved, but when he whispered her name, "M&I Pumpkin, it's Daddy," her lips trembled, and she cried. So did he. They carried her out on a stretcher. The media exploded headlines. Finally ran, "Girl found alive after 10 years missing." But Tyrone didn't care about headlines. All he cared about was that his daughter was alive, breathing, but broken. The nightmare wasn't over. It was just beginning. The years that followed Amani's disappearance passed like smoke, thin, choking, impossible to grasp her father. Terrence. Marshall stopped being the man he once was. He quit his job 3 weeks after the abduction, not because he wanted to, but because he couldn't sit at his desk, couldn't answer phones or write reports. Not when every street corner screamed her name. Not when every little girl's laugh in the distance shattered him like glass. He took to walking. 10, 15 miles a day, through alleys and back roads, past playgrounds and junkyards, always carrying the same photo of Amani, crinkled at the edges from years of rain and sweat. Her braids had beads on the ends. Her favorite color was yellow. She loved drawing pictures of horses. He recited those facts to himself, like a prayer. Monica tried to hold it together for their younger son, Caleb, and for her own sanity. But she was crumbling too. The police did what they could in the first few weeks. Then they stopped calling. After 6 months, the case went cold. No leads, no suspects, not a trace. But Monica refused to stop searching. She made a Facebook page, put up billboards, pled for help on local news, held candlelight vigils every birthday and every anniversary of Amani's disappearance. She was right outside. She'd whisper to the cameras. She was 6. She didn't just vanish. Somebody took her. And every year, the neighborhood got quieter. People moved away. Kids stopped playing in front yards. Parents eyed strangers like predators. But no one talked about what happened to Amani anymore. It was too hard, too painful, too close. 10 years passed. Caleb was 16, now taller than both his parents. Quiet, watchful. He didn't remember much about Amani. Just her laugh, the way she used to sing to herself while playing with her stuffed animals. He still kept her favorite Wonder buttons on the top shelf of his closet, untouched. Then, on a heavy summer afternoon, something changed. Terrence was walking their block again like he always did. His knees ached, his back was stiff, but the ritual grounded him as he passed by. The old Simmons house, a place that had stood abandoned for nearly 5 years. He saw movement in the backyard. Someone was out there. A man dragging bags of cement toward a newly built dog kennel. A big one, too big for any normal dog. Terrence paused at the fence, squinting. The man looked up briefly. Their eyes met just for a second. And in that second, something deep in Terrence's gut clenched. He didn't recognize the man, but the man looked afraid. Terrence moved on. But that night, he couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned, haunted by that look. The kennel, the cement, the fear. Something was wrong. It was like Amani's ghost had whispered to him through that fence. The next morning, he went to the city records office, pulled the deed to the Simmons house. The name listed wasn't Simmons anymore. It was Ronald Vickerson. A single man. No pets listed on the occupancy permit. Terrence's blood went cold. He went back that afternoon, this time with Caleb trailing behind Dad. "This is crazy," Caleb whispered. "You can't just snoop around someone's yard." Terrence didn't answer. He crept around the back gate, crouched behind the tall brush, that kennel, chain-link fence, thick tarp covering one end, and something strange about the foundation. Uneven. Like it had been dug up recently. Then they heard it. A cough. Not a dog's bark. A human cough. Faint, raspy, muffled. Terrence's hand shot out, grabbing Caleb's arm. "Did you hear that, Dad?" What the hell?" Another sound. A moan, then silence. Terrence didn't hesitate. He climbed over the fence, ignoring Caleb's shouted warnings, and ran to the kennel. He ripped the tarp aside, and there, beneath a panel of plywood barely visible under the floor, was a hatch. Terrence pounded on it. "Hello? Is someone down there?" Silence, then thumping, weak but deliberate. Terrence's hands were shaking. He dialed 911. Within minutes, police arrived, guns drawn. They pulled Ronald Vickerson out of the house without incident. He said nothing, smiled slightly as they handcuffed him. The officers pried open a hatch. Inside was a small room, a mattress, a bucket, a single light bulb, and a girl curled up, arms around her knees, hair matted, eyes terrified beyond reason. Terrence collapsed. "Emma," he whispered. "Please, please tell me it's you." The girl looked up slowly. Her lips parted. She studied his face like it was from another lifetime. "Daddy," she said, voice barely audible. And then she sobbed. Terrence ran to her, the officers barely holding him back. Monica arrived minutes later, falling to her knees the moment she saw her daughter being lifted out. Imani clung to her, trembling, unable to speak. The news exploded. Missing girl found alive after 10 years. Reporters camped outside the Marshall home. Vickerson was arraigned on federal charges within 48 hours. Police said he had a history of minor offenses, but nothing that would have flagged him as a threat. But it was what they found in his house that made even the detectives sick. Photos, videos, logs. Imani hadn't just been hidden. She had been imprisoned, used, dehumanized. 10 years. 10 birthdays. 10 years without sunlight or school or family. Now she was back. But she was broken. And for the Marshalls, the long road to healing had only just begun. The hospital room was too bright for Imani. She flinched at the overhead lights, flinched when nurses came in. Too fast, flinched when someone touched her arm. Even gently, they said it would take time, that her eyes weren't used to sunlight, that her brain had forgotten the rhythm of the outside world. She didn't speak much, only short sentences, whispered like secrets. Sometimes she stopped mid-sentence, like the words hit a wall inside her throat and turned to stone. Monica sat at her bedside. Day and night, she barely ate, barely slept. She just sat holding Amani's hand like she was 6 years old again. Terence paced the halls like a man with a fuse lit inside his chest. Caleb didn't say much. He just stood in the doorway, watching his sister with wide, stunned eyes, trying to recognize the girl who once chased him with water balloons and drew unicorns on the kitchen wall. But that girl was gone in her place, was someone quieter, older, too small for her age, malnourished, pale, with eyes that didn't always meet theirs. The doctor said her growth had been stunted. She was 16 now, but looked 13. She had severe vitamin deficiencies, internal scarring, and trauma. So much trauma, the psychiatrist didn't even know where to begin. She's going to need long-term therapy, Dr. Reyes explained. Voice soft, she may never fully return to who she was, but that doesn't mean she can't heal. She just needs safety time and unconditional love. Monica nodded. She is all three, but loving Amani now meant learning how to navigate her pain. She woke up screaming, some nights sobbing in her pillow, begging someone not to lock the door or take the light away. She wouldn't eat in front of anyone. For the first 2 weeks, she insisted on sleeping in the corner of her room, wrapped in a blanket, facing the door every time the door creaked or the faucet dripped. She startled like a deer. The therapist said it was complex trauma, that her brain had adapted to survive captivity. Her fight or flight system was always on. She didn't know how to be calm, how to feel safe. It was like her soul had been rewired at her first real therapy session. The therapist gave her a piece of paper and some crayons. You don't have a talk if you don't want to, they said. Just draw. Amani stared at the paper for a long time. Then she began to draw. When Monica saw it later, she nearly dropped her knees. It was a picture of a locked door. A girl sitting alone in the dark. No windows, just a tiny light bulb. Her eyes were two big circles empty. Scared, in the corner of the drawing was a small, crooked heart, barely visible. Hope or cry for help. Terence couldn't bring himself to look at the drawings. He spent his days talking to lawyers, reporters, victims, advocacy groups. He was furious that Ronald Vickerson had slipped through the cracks, that no one had flagged his purchases. Soundproofing materials, bulk food rations, surveillance gear that someone could hide a child in plain sight for 10 years. He attended every court hearing. He stared Ronald down from the gallery, eyes burning with rage. But Vickerson never looked at him, never looked at anyone. Just sat there, hands folded, expression blank. During one hearing, the prosecutor read part of Aman's medical report aloud. Monica sobbed. Terence stood up and had to be escorted out before he broke something after that. Em and I stopped watching the news. She asked her parents not to bring up the trial. I don't want to hear his name anymore, she whispered. So they didn't. They turned their focus inwards on her healing. They got a therapy dog named Marbles. Amani didn't pet him at first, just watched him from across the room. But slowly she began to reach out. One day, she fell asleep with him, curled against her chest, her fingers clutching his fur. Caleb was the first to make her laugh. It was accidental. He slipped on the kitchen tile, trying to sneak a cookie, and his flailing arms knocked down a bag of flour. It hit him square in the face. The Monty giggled a real giggle, small but real. Everyone froze. Then Monica started crying. Kayla blushed. What, it was funny. Do it again, Emmy whispered. So he did. Little by little, she let the light back in. She started sketching again slowly. At first, her drawings were still dark, but now they had more color. The corners weren't just black anymore. She drew marbles. She drew her family. She drew herself, standing in the sun. The therapist saw those pictures and smiled. She's starting to believe in the outside world again. Monica taught her how to cook again. Small things like scrambled eggs or toast. Amani was scared of the stove, scared of the flame, but she pushed through it. One morning, she made pancakes all by herself. Terrence hugged her, so hard she squeaked. You're amazing, he said. Amani didn't say anything, but she smiled. School was a different challenge. She hadn't been in a classroom since first grade. She didn't know how to interact with other kids. She got overwhelmed easily. Too much noise, too many questions, so they enrolled her in a special trauma-adapted program. The first few weeks, she cried every morning. But she went, and every day she came back with a new word, a new sketch. A little more, life in her eyes at night. Monica still found her curled in the corner. Sometimes, still heard the nightmares, still wiped her tears, but Amani was trying. And in the quiet moments when Marbles rested his head on her lap, or when Caleb coaxed her into a board game, or when Terrence sat beside her on the porch, in silence, something healed, not all at once, but enough to start again. Enough to hope, enough to believe that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't lost anymore. The moment Shondanda saw the yellow sweater, her knees buckled. It was hanging on a clothesline in the neighbor's backyard, next door to the vacant lot where Amaya disappeared a decade ago. She recognized that sweater like she'd stitched it yesterday, bright yellow, with a tiny heart embroidered near the left shoulder. Amaya wore it the day she vanished, 10 years ago. The world swore her daughter was dead. But now, the past was waving from a piece of cloth 20 feet away. Corey, she whispered, gripping her older son's arm. That's hers. That's her sweater. Corey looked from the window and narrowed his eyes. What, that sweater on the line? That's Amaya's. The breath left Corey's chest. Stay inside, Ma. He was out to the door before she could stop him. The neighbor, Arnold Becker, was a middle-aged man who had moved in 6 years ago. Quiet, live alone, claimed to be a retired dog breeder. No one paid him much attention. He'd wave occasionally. Sometimes shoveled snow off Shonda's sidewalk, but otherwise kept to himself. Corey pounded on his door. No answer. He pounded again. Harder. The house was too quiet, but behind the house something moved. Corey stepped around back, hands clenched. That's when he saw it, the dog kennel, large, rundown, covered in tarp. The dogs barked when they saw him, but behind them, near the base of the kennel, was a wooden hatch. Something was off. He knelt. The hatch was bolted with a thick padlock, but the dirt nearby had been disturbed fresh, like someone had been digging. His heart thumped like a drum. He ran back to the house. Ma, call the cops, now. They arrived within minutes. Too many sirens. Too much noise. Neighbors gathered. Arnold never returned home. They had to force the hatch open. What they found underneath changed everything. It was a basement, a makeshift shelter dug into the ground, smelled of mildew and urine, mattresses, chains, a tin plate. On the floor, and in the far corner, curled into herself like an animal, was a girl, thin, dirty, long dreadlocks covering her face. She flinched at the flashlight, sweetheart. One of the officers said gently, kneeling. It's okay. You're safe now. The girl didn't respond. She just stared, hollow eyes, shaking the moment Shandanda saw her. She collapsed. That's my baby. That's my baby girl. They rushed Amaya to the hospital. She hadn't spoken a word, wouldn't eat, wouldn't make eye contact. The doctor said her body was underweight, severely malnourished, signs of chronic trauma bruises, old and new. Her wrists bore scars. Where the chains had been her back showed signs of lashings. She had been broken systematically. They did a DNA test just to be sure. It came back positive. The girl was Amaya, and yet she didn't remember them when Shandanda sat by her bedside, gently holding her daughter's hand. Amaya flinched when she heard the word mom. She shook her head. She's been brainwashed, the nurse said softly. Conditioned to believe her captor was the only reality she had. They found Arnold Becker a week later, hiding in a motel under a fake name. He confessed to everything he said he saw Maya walking through the empty lot. 10 years ago. Said she reminded him of someone from his past. He'd built the kennel years before. Built it for this. He kept her there underground, away from eyes, away from life. Told her the world was evil, that her family had abandoned her, fed her scraps, punished her. If she made noise, gave her a false name, Jade told her she was worthless without him. And slowly, year by year, she started to believe it. He was sentenced to life without parole, but that didn't undo the years Amaya had to learn the world again. She was 18 now, legally an adult, but her mind was stuck somewhere between survival and silence. Shanada Anda fought to bring her daughter home, but the court ordered psychological care. First weeks passed, then months. Amaya was placed in a trauma recovery center, therapy sessions, daily medication. Slowly, she started to speak first in whispers, then in fragments. Her voice was like it had forgotten its own sound. I had a mother, she once asked during a session. Yes, baby, Shandanda whispered, tears falling. You had a mother. You have one, Amaya. Blinked. Does she love me with everything I had one night, months later? Corey brought her a photo album, pictures of the family, birthdays, cookouts. Amaya riding her tricycle. Amaya stared at one photo for a long time. It was her and her mom, hugging in front of a Christmas tree. She touched the page gently. I remember the lights. She said, they were blue. Shandanda broke into tears. They brought her home 6 months later. It wasn't easy. Amaya flinched at loud sounds, slept with the light on, didn't like to be touched, but slowly, brick by brick, she rebuilt Ruth. Corey and the whole family adjusted. There were therapy dogs, support groups, late-night drives when Amaya felt overwhelmed. Shandanda learned to sleep in a chair outside her daughter's room, just so she wouldn't feel alone. But Amaya smiled again, laughed again, and one day, at the breakfast table, she looked up and whispered, thanks for waiting. Shandanda froze. then smiled. Forever, baby girl. They lost 10 years, but they were building something new together. The ride to the hospital was silent, except for Zariah's shallow breathing and the occasional whimper from the back seat. The little girl clung to her mother's hand like it was the only real thing left in the world. Tasha kept whispering, "You're safe now, baby. You're safe." But even as she said it, she didn't believe it yet. Zaria had been found beneath a neighbor's dog kennel in a hidden chamber no one had ever known existed. 10 years, 10 years of thinking her daughter had vanished in a thin air. Now she was here, thin, malnourished, terrified, and barely able to speak, but alive. The ER nurses moved quickly when they saw her. Zaria flinched when they tried to touch her eyes, darting wildly at every man who entered the room. A male nurse reached for her wrist, and she screamed a gut-wrenching sound that made Tasha's knees buckle. Zaria clung to her mother's body, sobbing, "Only women in here," the doctor ordered. And within seconds, the room cleared of every man. Tasha sat on the edge of the bed, holding her daughter's face in her hands. "They're going to help you, okay, but you need to let them check you out. You're hurt." Zaria nodded slowly, but wouldn't let go of her. It took hours to complete the physical evaluation. Broken bones that never healed. Right scar tissue. Evidence of long-term malnutrition and physical trauma. But worse than that were the silent signs, the ones no X-ray could catch when the psychologist arrived. Zaria shut down entirely. No words, just wide, vacant eyes. The hospital admitted her. Overnight, Jamal slept in the waiting room chair, but Tasha refused to leave her daughter's side. She watched Zaria the way she used to when she was a baby, rising with every movement, every murmur, terrified it would vanish. "I need to report this," Jamal said softly. "The next morning, the man Keith, the one who took her, he's still walking around like he didn't ruin our lives." Tasha nodded slowly. "But we don't tell Zaria. Not yet. She's been through enough." Jamal made the call. The police came swiftly. This time, they failed. Once assumed, she ran off, refused to issue an Amber Alert. But they weren't making that mistake again, not after national headlines, not after Tasha's face went viral with the caption, "Mother finds daughter missing for 10 years. Right next door, Keith Edwards was arrested within hours, no struggle, no denial. As if he'd been waiting. "What did you do to her?" the detective asked. During questioning, "She was mine," he said calmly. "Like explaining the weather. They always give them back to their own, eventually. But she liked it. She didn't scream. After the first few weeks, the officer nearly lunged across the table. They charged Keith with kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, assault, and multiple counts of child abuse. Bail was denied. The media swarmed. Zaria's face was everywhere now, but always blurred to protect her identity back at the hospital. The psychiatrist sat across from Tasha and Jamal in a quiet room. "She has symptoms consistent with complex PTSD," the doctor explained. "Dissociation, hypervigilance, night terrors. She'll need long-term therapy, trauma-informed care, trust building, and eventually reintegration support." "Can she live a normal life?" Tasha whispered. "With the right support, yes, but it won't be easy. It won't be fast." They brought her home 2 weeks later, the first night back. In her old room, Zara screamed in her sleep until she woke up gasping. Tasha rushed in and found her daughter curled in the corner under her desk, rocking back and forth. "It's okay, aw," she whispered, kneeling beside her. "It's okay. You're not there anymore. He can't touch you now." Soraya didn't speak. She just crawled in her mother's lap and sobbed until she fell asleep. Mornings were hardest. Zaraya didn't eat unless Tasha reminded her. She flinched at doorbells. She refused to enter rooms with closed doors unless she could see out a window. She showered with a bathroom door open. She never wanted to be alone. Not even for a second. Tasha quit her job. Jamal cut back his hours. The family turned inward, protective, rebuilding from the inside out. Her old toys still sat on the shelf. Her bed was too small now. Her walls still had the pink butterflies she used to love. But Zaraya stared at them like they were alien. "Do you want to paint the room?" Maya, her older cousin, asked gently one afternoon. Zaria shook her head. "No, I want to stay. I want to remember what I lost." She started therapy twice a week. The first few sessions, she barely spoke, but eventually the stories came out. Keith had taken her while she was playing outside. She remembered the van, the cloth over her mouth, waking up in the basement. The rules, the punishments, the long dark days. "He told me no one would come for me," she said, in a session. "He said they forgot me, that Mom had a new daughter, that nobody wanted me." Tasha cried for hours after hearing that. But with time, Soraya started painting again. She took walks around the neighborhood with Tasha always close. She started writing in a journal. She even asked to visit her old school just to see it. "You're doing amazing." The therapist told her, "You're one of the strongest girls I've ever met." Zaria smiled, for the first time in weeks. But the trial loomed. Keith pleaded not guilty. His lawyers tried to paint him as mentally unstable, misunderstood. Zaria was asked if she would testify. At first, she said no. Then one night, she stood in the doorway of her mother's room and whispered, "I want him to hear my voice." The day of the trial, the courtroom was silent. As Zaria walked in, she wore a navy blue dress. Her hair was braided back. She stood tall. She looked Keith dead in the eye. "You told me no one would come," she said, voice shaking. "But you were wrong. My mother never gave up. My father never stopped. You tried to break me, but I'm not broken." The judge sentenced him to life without parole. Outside reporters asked her how she felt. "I'm not the girl he kept," she said. "I'm the girl who came home." Tasha wrapped her arms around her daughter, holding her tightly, and for the first time in 10 years, she believed it. Zoraya was really home. The first time Amina stepped into her childhood home after the rescue, the floor creaked in a way that made her flinch. It wasn't the sound itself. It was what the sound reminded her of. Creaks meant someone was coming. Creaks meant fear. But today, it was just her mother in the kitchen, humming softly to a gospel song on the radio, and Amina. Amina was home. "You all right, baby?" Relly called out, not turning around as she stirred the pot on the stove. Amina swallowed. "Yeah, just everything's louder now." Her mother turned, wiping her hands on a towel, eyes immediately searching Amina's face. Louder. "How like I can hear things again," Amina said, tears brimming. "Like I'm not scared of hearing them." They didn't say much more. They didn't need to. Rel walked over and wrapped her arms around her daughter for the 1,000th time since the rescue. And still, Amina melted into it like it was the first therapy was hard. Twice a week. Amina met with Dr. Carrington, a soft-spoken woman with gray locks and a face full of patience. It talked about the dark, about the sound of chains, about how Amina still sometimes slept, curled up in the corner of her room, even though she had a bed. Now, some days were better than others. On good days, she laughed, really laughed at something her Uncle Leon said, or when her little cousin tripped over his shoes. On bad days, she clammed up flinching when someone knocked on the door too loud, or when a stranger reached toward her. Too fast? Still she was healing. The trial was broadcast live. The courtroom overflowed with media and local supporters, all there to witness Raymond Keller's sentencing. The prosecution called Amina's father, Malcolm, to the stand. "First, I thought she was dead," he said, his voice cracking. "Every year, we lit candles on her birthday. Every year, we wondered what kind of woman she'd be." He turned and looked at Raymond. "And you try to erase her, to steal her entire life. But she's here, and you're not taking another second from her." The room was silent when Amina took the stand. Dressed in a light blue blouse and black slacks, she looked smaller than her age, but her voice, though shaking, never faltered. "You told me no one would look for me. You said I was forgotten, but I wasn't," she said, glaring at Raymond. "My father looked every day. My mom never stopped believing. And now the world sees what you did." Raymond never raised his eyes once the judge delivered the sentence. Life without parole, the courtroom erupted. Malcolm hugged Amina, sobbing into her hair. Michelle collapsed into her brother's arms, and Amina stood still, not smiling, not crying, just breathing. It was over, or rather it was just beginning. News crews flooded their lawn for weeks. Offers for interviews, book deals, documentaries, but Malcolm and Michelle refused. Most of them. This wasn't a spectacle. This was their daughter's life. Instead, they focus on helping her build it back. She started small reading books at night, sitting at the dinner table instead of eating alone, riding in the car, without panicking. When they passed, the scrapyard, Dr. Carrington called it, reclaiming the ordinary. One day, Relly asked gently, "You think you'll ever go back to school?" Amina hesitated maybe, "But I want to write first." "Write about it all," she said, for other kids, so they know they're not alone. The next year, Amina published a short story collection titled The Girl in the Basement. It wasn't about Raymond. It was about hope, about survival, about how the body remembers, but also forgives itself. She did return to school, slowly, with accommodations and therapy support, and she made a friend named Naomi who didn't ask questions and sat with her at lunch every day until she was ready to talk. Malcolm took up carpentry again. Michelle started a foundation for missing children. The front yard, once quiet and heavy with grief, now echoed with laughter as Amina's cousins ran through sprinklers in the summer. And every year, on the anniversary of Amina's rescue, the family didn't mourn. They celebrated not the kidnapping, not the pain, but the fact that a girl who was meant to vanish had lived. She grew into herself, slowly, carefully. Her scars didn't disappear, but she wore them like armor. She walked taller, her eyes sharper, her voice stronger. And when she spoke to groups of at-risk youth or comforted mothers who had lost children, her words carried weight because they knew she'd lived it on her 21st birthday. Amina stood in front of a crowd of 300 people, teachers, Activists, survivors, friends. She read from her newest book, What the World Didn't Take. My name is Amina Rhodes. She began when I was 10. I was stolen when I was 20. I came home and today I stand before you as a woman who is no longer afraid. She paused, looking out at the room. I'm not. What happened to me? I am what I chose to become. After Michelle wept openly in the front row, Malcolm held her hand tight. The applause lasted for minutes. People rose to their feet and Amina smiled. Not the small smile she wore when she was pretending, but the full one. The one they hadn't seen since she was a child. Later that night, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the house filled with laughter and music, Amina walked into the backyard. Alone, she stood beneath the old oak tree, the one her dad had planted years before she was born. She closed her eyes. I'm still here, she whispered to the wind, and I'm not going anywhere. The stars blinked above her, quiet and infinite, and for the first time in a decade she fell.